It is time now for a check of the top business news stories with our business editor, Kate Moody, who's here with me now. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Tom.
Now, the International Monetary Fund is warning of multiple challenges for the global economy this year.
Yeah, that's prompted it to pretty significantly downgrade its forecast for growth and recovery. New variants of COVID-19, high inflation, and ongoing disruption to global supply chains among the factors at play there. The IMF sees the world economy slowing from 5.9% expansion in 2021 to 4.4% this year. That's a half a percentage point lower than its last outlook. The world's two largest economies are expected to slow down too. The IMF forecasts 4 and 4.8% expansion in the US and China, respectively. The Eurozone and France also seen as losing steam, on track to grow 3.9 and 3.5% after their strong recoveries last year. Well, let's speak now to Petya Koeva Brooks, Deputy Director at the IMF's Research Department. Thanks for joining us on France 24. Talk us through, if you will, just some of the factors that have led the IMF to slash its growth forecast. Can you identify one overarching risk, perhaps, for 2022?
Well, we are starting the year with the global economy starting from a weaker point. There are really multiple challenges, and there's Omicron, which has hit the across the whole globe. Then there are the supply-demand imbalances and bottlenecks that are also weighing on activity and also propping up inflation. And last but not least, there is the policy transition, the withdrawal or the normalization of the extraordinary policy stimulus that had been provided over the past few years. So all of this adds up to a tricky year, a very challenging one, and hence our downgrade.
Now, the US and China are both seen as slowing pretty significantly, but for very different reasons.
Yeah, so in the US, we have a downgrade of 1.2, which is part of that is due to not including the Build Back Better fiscal package. Another part is because of the monetary, the tightening in monetary policy, which is now expected, as well as the supply bottlenecks, which we're seeing. And last but not least, Omicron is also playing a role, although a small one, mostly in the first quarter of this year.
And we're still seeing a very unequal recovery in different parts of the world, emerging economies really lagging behind advanced ones.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we're still seeing those divergences across countries. What we're seeing is that for advanced economies group, if we look out to 2024-25, the crisis is essentially leaving no scars. And it's a very different story when we look at the level of output, the expected level of output for emerging markets, and especially for low-income countries.
Now, inflation is one of the big problems of the moment. It's hit its highest level in decades in many parts of the world. Can you give us an idea of just how big that problem is, these price surges that we're seeing? And do you think governments, central banks, policymakers are rising to the occasion?
Yes, inflation is now a serious issue. We have seen elevated energy prices, food prices. We've seen the impact also of those supply-demand bottlenecks that I already mentioned, and in some cases, the domestic recovery is proceeding quite strongly. So all of this is creating inflation pressures, which do vary across countries. So I think the central banks, by and large, are doing the right thing by tightening monetary policy and making sure that those high inflation prints don't feed into each other, and they don't lead to also higher inflation expectations, which would make the inflation problem even worse.
Now, here in Europe, those rising prices in the energy sector are a particular problem, really affecting families across the Eurozone.
Yeah. In general, and when we talk about high inflation, and when it's coming also from energy prices, what happens is that it really erodes the real income of people, of households, and those who are most vulnerable at the low end of the income spectrum are affected the most because they spend a bigger share of their spending on those goods. So this again points to the need to have very targeted support in order to help with those impacts.
Now, we've seen a lot of disruption to global supply chains since the start of the pandemic. It's cited as one of the big risks that the IMF sees. When do you see those bottlenecks easing or a return to normal?
We are expecting those bottlenecks and those constraints to ease throughout the course of 2022. Part of the story is that so far we've seen just an extraordinary high demand for goods. And then we're expecting that to rotate more towards services. And at the same time, with the pandemic waning, we also expect some of the labor shortages and other issues that have been there on the supply side to also resolve. So again, we're expecting some easing throughout this year, although the risks, unfortunately, are in a direction that it could last longer, depending on how the virus and the virus evolution plays out.
I'd like to zero in on this idea of governments starting to withdraw their emergency pandemic stimulus. You mentioned it as one of the risks. It is a real delicate balancing act. At what pace should governments be making these changes?
Yeah, absolutely. They've been extraordinary measures, and I think they were the right thing to do. And now it's a matter of withdrawing them gradually and at a pace which is commensurate with what is happening in the specific economy that we are talking about. In some cases, we have much more buoyant domestic demand, and at that point, I don't think these measures may.
All right, Petya Koeva Brooks from the IMF, thank you so much for joining us on France 24 this evening. Let's check in quickly on the day's trading action now. Another roller coaster session on Wall Street. U.S. stocks rising once again. They've pared back some of their earlier very sharp losses just a day after one of their biggest comebacks in years. Analysts saying that this volatile trading is now far from over. Investors are waiting for some clarity from the U.S. Federal Reserve as it kicks off its two-day policy meeting. Earlier, the major European indices recovered from Monday's sharp sell-offs. We saw gains of about 1 percentage point in London, 3/4 in each Paris and Frankfurt. Tom, Wall Street set to close in just under an hour's time. I'll be back with the closing bell.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Our business editor, Kate Moody, thanks for bringing us up to speed. I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Stay tuned.